Hi everyone. Today we're going to take a look at the show Baby Reindeer. For those who don't know, it's a Netflix drama from comedian and actor Richard Gadd. It's based somewhat loosely on Gadd's 2019 Edinburgh show of the same name and inspired by real-life events in his own life. The show introduces us to the character of Donnie Dunn, a fictionalized version of Richard Gadd, and while curious internet detectives have made efforts to discover the identities of the other real people behind the characters, we aren't here to do that. Gadd has expressed that he doesn't want viewers doing that, and we will respect his wishes here. Though the real-life Martha seems to have outed herself, which was certainly a choice. We'll touch a little more on that later. The problems start when a woman named Martha enters a pub that he was working in. She's in a bit of a state, she has no money. He offers her a cup of tea on the house because he feels sorry for her. And this might be one of the few times that a British person offering a cup of tea was the cause of a problem rather than the solution. Grim times indeed. And that's all it took. From there it became an immediate escalation. She would continually show up at his pub, and eventually even Donnie's live comedy shows. At one point over this 6-month period of harassment, she physically assaulted him, and his girlfriend Terry. And Terry might be the most understanding woman on earth. She even turned to harassing his family. We're first introduced to Donnie when he tries to unsuccessfully make a report to the police. This is partly because the police generally don't take victims of stalking as seriously as they should, and partly because, in this situation, they prove to be kind of ultimately useless. Let's talk a little bit about Donnie. Donnie Dunn is Richard Gadd's avatar in this story. It's not a one-for-one retelling of what happened in real life, but the emotional truth of what he went through, with both the real-life Martha and Darian, who was a successful television writer who took a liking to Donnie, and also groomed him into a less than consensual physical relationship. Names, personal details, and in some cases actual events have been changed to protect the innocent and even the guilty parties in this. Because, as we will get to later on, it can cause problems if people see too much of themselves in adaptations of real events. In the character of Donnie, Gadd has shown himself to be vulnerable, often unpleasant. He doesn't always say the right thing, doesn't always do the right thing. He's difficult to like at times. There are, after all, few perfect victims. It doesn't happen. Good and true, free from flaws. Show me one person like that. You can find clips online of Gadd performing bits and pieces of his actual material that he put into the show, and they hit quite different in reality. You'll find yourself chuckling, even. Which is to show that Gadd's a very good actor. Quite impressive. And although it must have been very traumatic and uncomfortable for him to relive even a version of these events, you're left impressed. I certainly was. In the end, Donnie, and through him Richard Gadd, is someone you find yourself rooting for in spite of himself. Martha. Oh dear, Martha. I think we've all known a Martha. Those people who just break your heart by existing. They draw you in and they make you want to protect them, stand up for them and make all the bad things go away. They're very good at seeming pitiful, which is the worst kind of predator. And that's the insidious thing about the Marthas of the world. On some level, the way they present themselves is deliberate. Something, a persona they choose to adopt. And they use that as a tool to manipulate you. Their obsession with you can be endearing at first. In the show, Donnie talks about how he liked the attention she gave him. And that struck a chord with me. Because while it's not fair to say I've ever been stalked, there have been two people I've encountered through my job as an entertainer that have worried me. One more seriously than the other. The other one was fairly trivial, but still unwanted attention. And just like Donnie at first, even with the discomfort, I actually liked the attention. I mean, name me one person who doesn't want to be loved and adored. In some ways, my ego craved it. It props you up in your bad days. And even though I established clear and unpassable boundaries with these people, they pushed. For the sake of clarity, we'll call them Billy and Sky. I'm not going to give their real names out. And if they see a shred of themselves in what I'm about to talk about, look inward. Let's talk about Billy. Billy was a married person living in the United States, and she was the least worst offender of the two. They'd often say lewd and lusty things during streams, and I would dismiss it with a joke or a casual reminder that you're a married girl. They had a hard time taking the hint that I didn't like what they were doing, and I didn't want any part of it. Some people like to throw their underwear at famous singers. You were a bit like that, dear, except you were still wearing it. Thankfully, they eventually seemed to get the hint, or maybe they were more respectful of my being in a relationship than they were of their own. But, while uncomfortable, that was trivial. The next situation started seemingly innocent enough, and became more concerning as time went on. And now Sky. Sky has strong Martha energy. They exude sadness and wield helplessness as a weapon. Is weaponized weakness a thing? Well, I guess it is. It certainly felt like it was. And in my case, it wasn't even a cup of tea. It was a kind word here, a moment of encouragement there. And eventually they started mimicking how I speak. Not the way that friends will do with each other over time. In a way that it felt like they were mirroring my behavior to make me feel closer to them. It didn't work. I think with Sky it was obvious that they were crushing on me long before I knew it. It was obvious to other people. I'm not good at spotting that sort of thing, just as my fiancé. When it did become obvious, I decided to have a talk with them about it and let them know that I did not return those feelings. They seemed to accept it. They're good at telling you what you want to hear, the Marthas, to keep you at ease. They don't want to put you on edge if they don't have to. They want you to run away. So, I believed her, and I took her at her word. Though it did concern me when they would talk about moving, getting away from their seemingly awful family. And at first that was fine. Seemed like a good idea to me. And where did they want to move? Scotland, which is where I live. They wanted to move to another country where they'd have no support, no friends. And if I thought they had a snowball's chance in hell of actually making that happen, I'd have been more worried. In the months that followed my telling them that I didn't have feelings for them, I reconnected with my now fiancé, Jack. After being out of contact for a bit, Jack and I began dating. Sky's behavior became more erratic, unhealthy. There were even a few times that Jack noticed they started mimicking Jack's speech patterns and behaviors. So I realized that I had to have a second talk with them about their feelings. Again, they said all the right things, which were just hollow words they thought I wanted to hear. Still, we all tried to encourage them to get out of their seemingly bad family situation, but this ultimately culminated in them getting snippy with me one day, when they'd gone on a rant for the 1000th time about how awful their situation was, while doing nothing to change it. And they'd also done something irresponsible on Twitch, which I tried to talk them out of, and ultimately I had to cut them off. Though they would still come in frequently, for a while, assuming that everything was okay. I don't think it occurred to them that they might have done something wrong. I was very grateful for the distance the ocean provided us many times, and I have enjoyed the space and the silence since I cut them off. And I hope that's as bad as it ever gets when it comes to fans crossing boundaries for me. Considering what a lot of people have dealt with, I've been fortunate. Now, some of you who are new to the channel might be sitting there looking at me thinking, "Really? You?" I know, I have mirrors, but there's no accounting for taste. But we were talking about Martha. The woman she's based on has chosen to out herself publicly, as I mentioned. And while Gadd did take steps to conceal her identity, he didn't really do enough. Yes, he changed some of the details of her background, but he was using words she actually said to him publicly as dialogue in the show. You don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to crack that case. So, people tracked down the obvious culprit, and she confirmed it was her, which was interesting. She contested the show was not accurate. Also seemed to contradict herself in what was and wasn't true. That's still an ongoing thing, but as of the date of recording, she's apparently suing Netflix. Well, I don't think she's much of a lawyer, as I'm given to understand, so hopefully she has the means to hire a good one. Now let's talk about Darian. Speaking of the public harassing people in the name of justice, the character of Darian is a nasty, manipulative piece of work, caught up in a power fantasy. He likes to make his victims want him, want what he offered, and though they would keep coming back to him, it was a result of mind games. In some ways, Darian was worse than Martha. He was not obsessed. He was casual and aloof in his machinations. And in the end, he never got punished. He's out there now, living his life, perhaps working on another victim. Now, those same wannabe detectives were on the case to find out who Darian really is, and they picked a man named Sean Foley. It's not him. Sean Foley is an innocent man whose crimes are simply that he's a writer, he's male of a certain age, and he has a beard. That's what they based it on. Gadd had to come out and say no, it wasn't him, and please stop harassing his friends. So that's one bearded man down, a few billion to go. Of course, the rabbles already moved on to a different target. There's no point talking about that. But it's another British male writer with a beard. If anything, Gillette must be very happy about what this is about to do for their sales numbers. So let's talk stalkers. What motivates a stalker? I think about this a lot. I guess because it makes no sense to me. Why would you want to go after someone who has no interest in you again and again? And I think I understand it. Or at least I have a layman's understanding of it. They don't want their victims, they want the idea of them. What happened in Baby Reindeer was a good example of this. They have a notion of who you are. Sky had a notion of who I was. And in some way it was truthful, but in others it was just a pure fantasy. They want the fantasy. That's the pool. A real person will disagree. They have opinions. They'll fart excessively after eating Brussels sprouts. They will have feelings that are inconvenient to your desires, and so stalkers choose fantasy. And the fantasy is enough for a while, according to their notion of who you are, and one day it breaks. And when that happens, they can get dangerous. That doesn't mean everyone who becomes obsessed becomes a stalker. They might just have a really detailed blog about Taylor Swift's feet. I haven't looked that up, but I can almost guarantee you that it exists. And if they don't do that, well, they get off on the fear of making you live in fear. They don't necessarily turn to violence, but the threat of it might be enough for them. Any one of us can be a victim, but the high-profile cases obviously get more attention if it's a celebrity or such. And even then, justice is not always, rarely, the result. Claudia Christian from Babylon 5 has had many stalkers in her life, and she said, I went back and forth with the police until one cop took pity on me and said, look, we can't do anything about him masturbating, but I do think he could be dangerous. Do you want a gun? You're going to need one. So you wait until he's out front, put on something nice, and invite him in. Make sure he's inside the house and then shoot him. When we come over, you say that he broke in, but you make sure he's inside the house, otherwise you're the one we're going to have to arrest. Really? No thanks. The guy creeped me out, but I didn't want to shoot him. She goes on to say in that same chapter that while she even got into a traffic accident while trying to evade her stalker at that time, the police couldn't or wouldn't do anything about it because this was before the murder of Rebecca Schaefer. For those unfamiliar, Rebecca was a young actress who was stalked for 3 years by a man who would eventually kill her. Her death led to the creation of the Driver's Protection Act, which means the DMV can't release your address to anyone who happens to want it. However, it took Rebecca's death and 5 more years for that to actually happen. Good job. Then, of course, there was Jodie Foster. Jodie Foster was harassed by an obsessed John Hinckley Jr., who, in a feat of logic that escapes me, would go on to try to assassinate Ronald Reagan, thinking it would impress her. He injured 4 people that day. Reagan himself, Thomas Delahunty, Timothy McCarthy, and lastly James Brady, who was Reagan's press secretary at the time. While Brady would live another 33 years, when he passed away in 2014, his death was actually ruled as a homicide. No additional charges were brought, and Hinckley is a free man today. He actually has a YouTube channel where he puts out his own music. He even had an album out in 2023. I broke a little when I learned that part. I had to take a break from writing for a couple of hours. Of course, those aren't the only people who have had to deal with stalkers. Even recently, Taylor Swift, one of the most untouchable people in the world, had to deal with one. It would be a never-ending task trying to understand them all and categorize them, but that's not our job. That's for the mental health professionals. And if you do find yourself in that situation, reach out to someone. Ask for help getting yourself under control, because you're just going to ruin your life, and more importantly, you're going to ruin someone else's too. And if you have been the victim of stalking or harassment of any kind, there are resources to help you, even if the police aren't eager to get involved. There are others who will happily listen and give you advice. Richard Gadd waited a long time to get help, and we can't blame him for that. It's human nature to tell yourself things will just get better on their own. And the next thing you know, 6 months or even years have gone by, with this person getting bolder and bolder, using you as their little plaything. They don't all become violent, but your life and your peace of mind is worth more than that. Don't take the risk. And take very good care of yourself. I did it.